All right, now let us look at TC10B, and this is taxation. So in this course, we're looking at one of the paper at our diploma technician level, and that's taxation. Taxation, and the code is TC10B. So we'll be looking at the overview and how we approach the manual, right? So we'll first look at the table of content, right? Table of content. We'll first look at the aim of the module and then the outcome. We'll also look at the format and the standard of the examination paper. Then in chapter 1, we'll look at introduction to taxation. Then chapter 2, administration of taxes. Chapter 3, taxation of individuals. Chapter 4, taxation of employees. Chapter 5, fringe benefit tax. Chapter 6, taxation of passive income. Chapter 7, taxation of gains and losses. Chapter 8, capital allowances. Chapter 9, business taxation. Chapter 10, taxation for partnership. Chapter 11, taxation of companies. Chapter 12, special trades and cases. Chapter 13, taxation collection methods. Chapter 14, provision tax system. Chapter 15, returns and assessments. Chapter 16, tax appeal procedures. Chapter 17, value added tax. Chapter 18, custom duty, and chapter 19 is excise tax. So it's quite a long course, right? Subject, and we'll go through 19 chapters, right? And then we also have the appendix at the end of this manual. We have Appendix A, which is the general exemption, first schedule to the Taxation Act. And then we have Appendix B, rate of income tax, 11th schedule. Appendix C, countries with which Malawi has entered into tax agreements. Chapter Appendix D, annual allowance. Chapter Appendix E, list of approved charity organization. Appendix F, withholding tax rate of deductions. Appendix G is zero rate goods and services for VAT purposes. And Appendix H, exempt goods and services for VAT purposes. So these appendix, we will have to make sure that we refer to them time and again. Time and again, we'll have to refer to them. Let's look at how we're going to approach this course. So the paper TC10, taxation, is a paper that is discursive and requires computation. So we're looking at two elements here. We're looking at two elements, right? So the other part will be the theory that's discursive. We are explaining, describing, listing, and the other part is computational. We're basing doing calculations. I would say close to 50-50, not necessarily 50-50. They might vary from paper to paper, but I would say give your attention to both areas. The theory part or the discursive part, where you have to describe, mention the advantages, list the advantages, and so on and so forth, and also look at the computation part for you to pass this exam. Right? So that's don't actually lean on one side. You end up failing. Right. Let us look at the content of the paper. So the paper comprises of the following main areas. The first area, principles of taxation and introduction to Malawi taxation. That's chapter 1. Then we also have income tax on a person, taxation of business income, then capital allowance, then taxation of special trades and cases, collection and administration of tax, value added taxation, customs duties, and excise. So you can see these are basically broad areas of the whole syllabus. What skills are you supposed to demonstrate in the exam? So you'll be required to understand the principles of taxation and apply these principles in the computation of taxation. So the aim of the module is to enable you as students to understand the general objective of taxation and to apply this knowledge in practice by calculating income tax for different taxable persons, including individuals, partnership, corporate bodies, taxation principles applicable to special trade. So we want you at the end of the course, you should have acquired the knowledge that you can apply when calculating income tax of the different organizations and businesses. And that's the main of this module. We would say this knowledge is basically applicable to our day-to-day as accountants, calculations of taxes. All right. So the outcome of the whole course is basically on completion of the module, the candidate should be able to explain the principles of taxation. We will learn a lot of principles in this module. So you have to be able to explain what the principle is saying on that particular area. Describe the administration of taxes in Malawi. Explain the general objective of Malawi tax and the different types of tax. Calculate tax liability for individual and corporate bodies. Calculate value-added tax, excise, and custom duty owed by taxpayer, and lastly, prepare various tax return. So these are what you are required to know after going through the whole course. So now let us look at what is the format of the exam. So the examination will be divided into two sections. We have section A and section B, right? And all of them will be compulsory. Well, section A has two compulsory questions. So you have two questions in section A. All of them are supposed to be answered, right? All of them are supposed to be answered. So your section A. So two questions, compulsory. All of them have to be answered. And while in section B, right? Section B will have 5 questions and candidates will be required to answer any 3. So section A is 40 marks and section B is 60 marks. So we have 40 marks for this one, answer all. Section B, there are 4 questions, answer 3, right? Answer 3 and that's 60 marks. That means each question actually has a 20 mark. Each question is a 20 marker. So the table below shows the relative weightings of topics within the module and gives the indication of the exam content for each area. So these are basically showing us, giving us an idea of how much might come during the exam in terms of that topic area. So they're saying the introduction of tax and administration is worth at least 10% in the exam. Income tax on individual corporations, this is 40%. Capital allowance, around 10%. Taxation of special trades and cases, around 10%. Collection of tax, that's 10%. Value added tax, that's 10%. Custom duty, 5%. Excise, 5%. The total is 100%. So you can see that the one that has the most marks is basically income tax on individuals and corporate, up to 40%, right? So we definitely want to make sure that we are on top of our games when it comes to preparing this particular. But time to time, they might actually change this and make sure that the exam is rigorous. So don't expect these exact weightings in the exam on one particular paper, but overall, over time, if you do the averages, you would find that these are basically the weightings on different areas. So now let us look at the learning outcome of this module. The following are the learning outcomes of each individual topic, so that we just have an overview of all the 8 major areas that we are supposed to look at, right? So the first major area, we talked about the introduction to tax and tax administration. So candidates should be able to explain the principles and objectives of taxation and how taxes are administered in Malawi. So In the examination, you may be required to know the following. Explain the reasons for government introducing a tax system. Describe the essential element of good tax system. Clarify taxes and explain the characteristics of taxes. State the powers of the Commissioner General. Explain the significance and application of the rules of secrecy. Explain the role of the public officer and state the appeal procedures. So, in terms of introduction and administration of tax, this is what you have supposed to know as students in taxation. Right. Let's look at the second area, which is income tax income tax on individuals and corporate bodies. So we saw that this one actually has 40% mark wording in the exam. Really important area in the exam. And the candidates should be able to classify entities on individual, partnership, companies for tax purposes and state how they are. So we're looking at individual and corporate bodies, including individuals, small businesses, right? So traders, partnership, and also companies. We're looking at how we calculate income tax for all these types or forms of businesses, right? So in the exam, candidates may be required to identify accessible and exempt income, allowable and non-allowable deduction, and taxable income. But we have to know these ones. The second thing is compute fringe benefit tax, compute capital gains or losses, compute foreign exchange gains or losses, compute tax on passive income, and compute tax for individuals, partnership, and corporate bodies. That's why it has a really big weighting in the examination, because you can see that there are a lot of computations that are required and for different forms of taxes and different forms of businesses. So that's why it has a bigger weighting. Right, a bigger weighting. Let's look at capital allowance. So candidates should be able to explain and compute the different types of capital allowance and identify the scenarios on which assets capital allowance can be claimed. Right? In the examination, candidates may be required to describe the initial investment and annual allowance, identify the assets that qualify for capital allowance, compute capital allowance, and describe incentive and restrictions on capital allowance. Right? So that's to do with capital allowance. When it comes to taxations of special trades and cases, the candidates were supposed to know how to describe how special trades are taxed, right? That's you are required to explain or compute the following: for farming, timber trading, charities and trustees, club and society, ecclesiastical bodies, insurance business, hire purchase, double taxation, and turnover. So these are some of the special trades and taxes that we are supposed to know how to compute taxes for and to describe therefore. Now let us look at collection of taxes, the fifth topic area, which you are required to identify the obligation the Malay tax systems impose on taxpayers and the implication of non-compliance. In the examination, you will be required to explain the correction, right? The collection procedures for the following: pay as you earn, pay, withholding tax, provision tax, non-residential tax, identify the records that must be kept for various taxes, state due dates for various tax returns, and penalties for non-compliance. Now, looking at value-added tax, you are supposed to know how to calculate the amount of VAT owed and owed by or owed to the business. Right, in the examinations, you will be required to classify supplies as exempt, zero rated, and taxable. Explain when a taxpayer could or should register or deregister for VAT. Explain the obligation for registered persons. Describe the VAT credit system, input or output VAT and refunds. Then compute VAT. That's basically it. So we should also look at customs duty. Candidates should be able to explain the principal duties and, where applicable, calculate the amount of customs duty payable by taxpayer. In the examinations, you might be required to describe the nature and the functions of customs duty, explain the importation and declaration procedures, port of entry, import documentation, valuations of good and purpose of importation, explain the functions of a customs tariff, explain rules of original and preferential of imported goods, compute customs duty, explain storage and post-importation procedures, clearing procedures, bondage warehouses, custom record keeping, and compute custom duties. And lastly, let us look at excise. Candidates should be able to explain the principle of excise duty and, where applicable, calculate the amount of excise duty owed by the taxpayer. In the examinations, candidates may be required to explain what is meant by excise as part of the indirect taxation and how it is counted for in Malawi. Identify goods liable for excise taxation and explain the registration procedures and conditions applying to all tax traders, excise traders, and their obligation. So that's basically the overview and what we are expected to know after we finish everything, right? In terms of coming up with this manual, there are a number of references that they use: the Custom and Excise Act, ICAM Taxation Manual, Malai Taxation Act, and Value Added Tax. Now, talking about this module, we can see that mostly we are looking at acts of the parliaments. That means these are laws. So we can see that we have the VAT Act, right? We have the VAT Act. We have the Malawi Taxation Act, right? Malawi Tax Act. And we also have the exercise, right? We have the customs and exercise. So we have the customs and exercise, right? Act. So, because this module is based on acts, what it means is that we cannot apply general knowledge. We cannot apply general knowledge. We can never apply general knowledge. Acts are supposed to be applied as they are. No general knowledge. You say what the act says. No general knowledge. We know that we will have sections, right? A lot of sections. For this particular exam, it's not really required for you to memorize what sections is for a particular principle. But what you're supposed to know is to basically know the principle behind that. If you know the principle, you are good. But some areas, they might tell you, define something according to a particular section of an act. When they tell you that define a particular item as according to a section, you are supposed to direct quote what that section says. So, unless they tell you that define what's according to something, you are supposed to actually say it as the section states it. That's the only way. That's the only time you are supposed to memorize what a particular section is all about, right? When they actually quote you the section and they tell you that what does the definition mean. But otherwise, when they tell you define, you can basically just switch the definition, right? And find what are the main principles so that you highlight in your definition. Right. Now, let's create, as I said, it's not really a very difficult uh, subject. I would say maybe if the statistics, right? If you have gone through the whole course properly, right? Probably you have a 70 to 80% chance of passing. So that's a very big chance of passing this. So it means that if we can go through the whole course together, chapter after chapter, this should not give you a lot of headaches. One thing that we should note is that this manual is sort of outdated. So I was supposed to inquire to the people from ICAM so that I know what items I should teach you in terms of different rates and any changes that have happened, right? So the response that they gave me is that I should actually deliver what's in here, right? But my rate ena are income tax, right? Maka income tax for individual, right? These ones will be provided in the exam. So what it means, use the income tax that are provided in the exams. Or let me just say, any rate that has been given in the exam, use that one, right? Use that one, any rates that have been given in the exam. Komano, zina zimembwena mulowezi, we are going to what? Focus on zimene zili manual, although some of them might be outdated. Just for your knowledge, right? Just for your knowledge, I can time to time just tell you what changes are there, but I will still require you to write what is in the manual. Just for the exam, just for the sake of the exam, just write what's in the manual for you to get this. But I'll just, from time to time, tell you what's the prevailing changes, right? So that you can be able to apply it when it comes to an interview or you are faced in a certain situation where you are supposed to apply your knowledge. So time to time, I will refer to what are the changes, but mostly we'll focus on what the manual is actually saying, right? What the manual is saying. So that's something that we have to note. So whenever maybe you encounter discussions with other people that maybe are doing something, right? Maybe they are tutors, maybe they're telling them to use the prevailing rates or change rates. Don't worry about that. One thing that you should know is that they will mark the principle. Have you done the correct statement, right? Not really the rates, but the principle. That's why maybe the secretary of the ICAM guys, they actually advise me to actually take what's in the manual, right? For the areas where the rates are not provided. So that's what we're going to say. But even if you use the prevailing rates, I guess they'll still mark you because you are actually applying the principles correctly. So I'll show you how I used to do it when I was writing this, just to make sure that I clear the examiner, in case maybe the examiner is using up-to-date rates, right? Up-to-date rates. So whenever I know that these rates have not been given to me and these rates are required for me to memorize, what I usually do is basically just write a note that uh, all my rates and principles have been taken from the manual and not any prevailing what changes that are happening. That's basically it. Just to give them know that please don't penalize me for what? For using things that are in the manual. It's your fault because you were supposed to update it if you wanted us to actually be on top of our game. right? So that's it. Use the manual. Use the manual all the times. Use the rates on the unless the examination has given you. So the first thing that you have to go is to go at the end of the your question bank and see the rates that are being given to you, so that you are not cried away. Nkumabanga use my rate always, right? So most likely akabega income tax for individual. That's mostly the minimum of beta. I'll just have to check with ICAP which my rate mabwera baya bamais. So that's something that we have to make sure that we are aware of, so that we know which ones are supposed to be memorized before we go into the exams. So this is basically the introduction of the course. Thank you.